I think it's very important for Christians to vote. I've known Christians in the past who've said, I don't bother voting because I think God decides the outcome of elections. But I think God uses us, ordinary people, to vote and to make the decision. And, you know, in one of his letters, St. Paul calls us to be good citizens. If you read the Message version, that's actually how it's translated. We're supposed to be good citizens. And I think part of good citizenship is exercising your vote. And I think as Christians, we want our views and opinions and the kind of values that we hold dear to be reflected in society. And I think one way in which we can do that is by exercising our right to vote. I don't think we should see that as the be-all and end-all. I mean, I think we need to be part of the democratic process the whole time. And I think we need to be in touch with the system and in touch with our elected representatives and talking to them. I've known some members of Parliament who said that Christians are the best complainers. The letters they get that are complaining about stuff are all from Christians. And I think, I mean, that's good in a way that we're engaged, but why don't we also write sometimes and say we're really happy with what you're doing, or we want to affirm what you're doing, or even that we're praying for you. I think that would mean quite a lot to them as well. So voting's important, but I think being part of the process all the time is important as well. Yeah, well, I think when Christians are thinking about who to vote for, which party, which candidate, I think we need to think bigger than just what's in it for us. I mean, some of the debate is often couched in terms of, well, party X is offering this in terms of tax or something, how better off will we be, you know? And I think sometimes that can promote a very kind of selfish and individualistic view. And I think as Christians we want to perhaps look beyond just what's in our own personal interest and say, well, how can we vote in the interests of the wider community, and particularly perhaps the people who are suffering most or most at the edges or at the bottom of society? Can we take that into account when we're voting? And I know, you know, it's important as well. I've known Christians who say, well, I vote for candidate X because they take a very strong line on abortion. And I think, well, that's good that they take that line on abortion, but do they show compassion in other issues? And I think if you've got someone who's pretty strong on one issue, but maybe they don't show any compassion in terms of a more just society, or they think we should sort of keep asylum seekers out or something, I think you've got to take all the bigger picture into account and not just vote for someone just on one particular issue, or even maybe just because they share your Christian faith. I mean, if their views you think don't really conform to what you think Jesus was teaching, then I think you've got to sort of take that into account. And I also want to know, I think we should think about where some of the candidates are on the big picture. I mean, one of the big issues we face at the moment is climate change, and I think, you know, the years are running out really in terms of how long we've got before disaster hits. Well, our politicians and candidates really facing up to some of these big challenges, and I think we need to take that into account. So, you know, let's not just focus on our private concerns or just one issue, but try and look at the thing as a whole. I think as Christians, I think all Kiwis ought to be very worried about the inequality gap in New Zealand. You talk to people who've lived in New Zealand in the 50s and 60s, and they look back and say we were a more equal society, and it was a happier society. We were more trusting of each other. You know, we were a bit more contented. And now, you know, if you look at a book like The Spirit Level, for example, which is based on 30 years of quite meticulous research, they now argue that where you've got high levels of inequality in a society, it's not good for that society. And they argue that New Zealand is pretty much up there in probably 5th or 6th place in the developed world in terms of high levels of inequality. So something's happened over the last few decades that we've seen a widening, ever-widening gap between the rich and the poor. And what The Spirit Level says, and I think, you know, you can contest bits of it, but I think the central thesis is right, that societies with greater inequality have a very poor outcomes in a number of social areas. So there's poorer kind of levels of education, there's more obesity, they probably imprison more people, there's shorter lifespan. I mean, there's a whole raft of things that it's shown that in countries where they've just made even perhaps a small reduction in inequality, they've seen some social improvements. It's not as though, you know, we've all got to be totally equal, or removing inequality will be a kind of panacea for all ills, but it is saying that if we can work towards a greater sense of equality, we'll be a better society. And it's not just the kind of old lefties saying this, actually. It's the argument in the spirit level is that we're all better off, actually. Even those who are very well off and have a high stake in society suffer because we've all, at the end of the day, got to pick up the consequences of poor health and poor education and high imprisonment rates. It's going to cost us a lot in terms of our tax and our contribution to society in solving those problems. So actually we're all better off, not just the people at the bottom who will obviously benefit as well from less inequality. And I think as Christians, there's quite a strong message in Scripture that God created everyone equal. We're all created in God's image. We have a right to the basic needs that enable us to live as children of God. And where you've got a society where people are struggling at the edges and the margins, while other people are doing extremely well, the Bible actually has some quite interesting things to say about that. And some of the economic models that you get in Scripture, like the Jubilee, for example, actually suggest that a good society has some mechanisms in there that kind of restrict a gap becoming entrenched between rich and poor, and that actually we should see an economy working for the benefit of the whole of community. And a community suffers when even somebody drops off the edge. You know, we should try and get them back in. So I think there's strong theological reasons and strong empirical reasons why we should be concerned about inequality and make that an issue at the election. You know, does your candidate take that seriously and think that actually we'd be a better society if we addressed inequality, or are they just relaxed about, you know, about that getting worse? Yeah, we're going to have a kick the tyres referendum on MMP, and do we want to go back to another system or whatever? I think that's it's a very important question in how we have a voting system is a very important issue. I just think there is no one sort of Christian answer to this. I mean, I think there are pros and cons in all the different systems. So I think we've all, as individuals, got to weigh up what we think are the most important criteria for a voting system. I mean, I think the two most important things are, does the system enable representative democracy to flourish, but does it also enable members of Parliament to listen to and respond to the views of their electorate and the views of the public? And it's getting that balance right. And as I say, no one system that's ever been devised gets that balance right. So there are pros and cons. And I think we need to weigh up things like, there's obviously advantages in having a lot of electorate members because they can be more responsive to us as members of their electorate, and they can listen to us as their own kind of constituents. Whereas list MPs, of course, are kind of chosen more by the party. We don't have a lot of say in who they are. On the other hand, are we concerned that smaller interest groups are represented? And are we concerned that minority views are not excluded? Some systems can perhaps put a big emphasis on the very big parties and actually exclude minority interests. And that means that some people are kind of permanently disenfranchised because their views never get represented. So we need to take that into account when we're looking at different systems. And I don't think, you know, a system where someone's vote is worthless is a rather worrying system, I think.